My name is Yvette Boudreau, and I was 46 years old the first time I understood exactly what kind of man my landlord was. I was standing in ankle-deep water in the lobby of the Bellamy, watching him step over it in dry loafers, as if the flood were a small rudeness the building had committed against him personally. A pipe had let go in the ceiling overnight. The carpet squelched. A brown stain the shape of a continent spread across the plaster, and the smell, that wet, mineral, growing smell, had already reached the mailboxes. He came in whistling. He looked at the water, and he looked at us, 3 tenants gathered helpless in our socks, and he smiled the smile of a man who owns the exit. "Old buildings breathe," he said. "She'll dry out." She did not dry out. She never dried out, not once in the years I lived under his signature. But I remember that morning because of what he did next, which was nothing. He turned around and left, and he did it slowly, unbothered, a man so certain no one was watching that he had stopped bothering to pretend. That certainty was the most valuable thing he owned, and he had no idea he was about to hand it to me. I want to tell you how it ended before I tell you how it began, because I don't want you sitting through this hoping I finally lost my temper and did something loud. I didn't. There was no screaming match that fixed anything, no viral video, no keyed car, no lawsuit I filed in a rage. What happened, in the end, was that a man who had spent a decade cheating a housing program signed his name to a stack of documents swearing that everything was fine, and I simply kept the copies. Every date, every certificate, every wet, moldy, peeling lie in his own handwriting. Harlan Deverell lost the building. He lost the money, all of it, a clawback and a set of penalties that the local paper reported at just over $231,000. He stood in a courtroom and read aloud from a page an admission of what he had done, while I sat a few feet away and did not say one single word. I never had to sue him. His own paperwork was the rope. He tied every knot himself, and he was so proud of his own hands that he never once looked up to see who was holding the other end. I want to be honest with you about the kind of story this is. It is not the loud one. It is not the one where a clever woman walks into a lawyer's office, slaps down a folder, and walks out rich and vindicated by the end of the week. I've watched those stories too, and they're satisfying, and mostly they aren't true. This is the quieter kind, and I think the truer kind. It is a story about a man who was so sure no one was watching that he kept doing the wrong thing in writing, on camera, and eventually under oath, over and over, for years, until the sheer accumulated weight of his own conduct came down on him, and there was nothing underneath it to hold him up. My only job in this story, the whole of it from beginning to end, was not to look away, to write down the date, to photograph what was in front of me, and to refuse, no matter how many times he tried, to be frightened into silence. That's it. That's the entire method. I know it doesn't sound like much. An old man taught it to me, one date at a time, and by the time I understood how much it was already working. The Bellamy was a tired brick 4-story on a street the city had quietly given up on, and I had spent 20 years as a medical records coder at a county hospital, which is a job most people find unbearably dull and which I loved with my whole heart. My work was accuracy. My work was the date and time a thing happened, exactly as it happened, in language so plain no one could argue with it. A code is not angry. A code does not exaggerate. A code says only what occurred, and it says it the same way at 9 in the morning as it does at midnight. And that steadiness turned out to be the most useful thing about me, more useful than courage, more useful than anger, more useful than being right. Before I take you any further into that building, let me step out of the story for just a moment. If you find yourself pulled into this, if you want to know how it comes apart, I'd be grateful if you subscribe to Revenge Lab. That's all. No pressure, not now, not ever. It only helps a small channel like this one keep telling the slow, true kind of story, and you can leave the moment it stops being worth your time. While you're here, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Leave a comment and tell me a city, a country, the seat of a bus, a kitchen at 2 in the morning. And tell me how your day has actually been, not the polite version, the real one. I read them, and it means more than you'd think to know who's out there in the quiet with me. Whatever kind of day it's been, I hope the rest of it is gentle with you. Now, back to the water in the lobby. He was not, at first, a monster. That's the part people never believe, and it's the part that matters most. When I signed my lease, Deverell was warm. He had a good handshake and a way of remembering your name that made you feel chosen. He called the building our building, and the first week I was there, he replaced the burned-out fixture in the lobby with a bright new one, standing on the ladder himself, calling down that he liked to keep the place looking cared for. I believed him. I want you to know I believed him, because everyone in that building had believed him once, and the believing was how he worked. What I learned later, what took me 2 years to see clearly, was that the lobby light was the whole strategy in miniature. It was cheap. It was visible. Everyone who walked in saw it and thought, this is a man who fixes things. And behind that one bright bulb, in the parts of the building no visitor ever saw, everything that was expensive and invisible was left to rot. The furnace that limped through winter, the pipes that wept behind the walls, the mold that bloomed black in the widow's ceiling on the 3rd floor, the lead paint flaking in the units where the children slept. He spent $5 on the thing you could see and saved $50,000 on the things you couldn't, and he called himself a good landlord. And for a while, we all agreed with him because agreeing was easier than the alternative. His name was Harlan DeVerl. I'll name him when I have to, so you can follow who did what to whom, but I won't let him echo through this the way he echoed through my life for those years. Mostly he'll just be the landlord. The man. Him. That's more than he ever gave any of us. The first crack in his charm, for me, was the widow on the 3rd floor. Her name was Odessa. She had lived in the Bellamy for 31 years, longer than the landlord had owned it, longer than most of the neighborhood had existed in its current shape. Her ceiling had been failing for months. When I first went up to introduce myself, I saw it, a swollen brown bulge in the plaster over her kitchen table, weeping at the low corner, and the unmistakable creeping dark of mold along the seam. She kept a pot on the table to catch the drip. She had draped a dish towel over the pot, so the sound wouldn't keep her awake. I asked her if she'd told him. She looked at me the way you look at a child who has asked something sweet and impossible. Of course she'd told him. She'd told him a dozen times. And each time he had come up and stood in her kitchen and looked at the ceiling and told her kindly, with real seeming concern, that she must be running her humidifier too much, or leaving the bathroom fan off, or that a woman living alone at her age sometimes didn't notice how much moisture she made. He made it her fault. He did it gently. And she was tired and alone, and she had started to believe that maybe it was her fault, and so she had stopped calling and put a towel over the pot and made herself small. That was the thing I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Not the ceiling, the towel over the pot. Odessa had been made to feel ashamed of a leak she did not cause in a home she had kept for 3 decades by a man collecting her rent. And she thought she was the only one. The old man who taught me everything lived directly beneath me, in a ground floor unit that smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. I met him because his radiator and mine shared a temperament, which is to say neither of them worked, and one cold night I went down to ask if his was doing the same thing mine was, clanking, then dying, then nothing. Pharaoh opened the door in a cardigan with leather patches at the elbows, looked at me for a moment, and said, "Did you write down the time it stopped?" I said no. "Do it now," he said. "Then come in, I'll make tea." He had spent 34 years as a grievance representative for a union. The person you went to when the company did something to you that wasn't fair and probably wasn't legal, and it was his job to make them stop. He had won, he told me, hundreds of cases in those years, and he had almost never once raised his voice. He had won them with paper, with dates, with the patient, unglamorous accumulation of small documented facts until the weight of them was undeniable, until the other side looked at the file and understood, all at once, that there was no argument left to have. "Temper is a gift you give the other side," Pharaoh said that first night, pouring the tea. "It lets them make the story about you, about how you're difficult, how you're unstable, how you can't be trusted. The moment you're the story, they've won." He tapped the table. "But a date can't be talked out of. A photograph doesn't get upset and say something it regrets. You want to beat a man like your landlord? Be the most boring person he's ever met, be a clerk. Clerks win wars." His name was Mr. Pharaoh. I'll call him the old man, too, or my neighbor downstairs, or my friend from the ground floor, but I'll say his name often enough that you'll know him, because a man who gives you everything he had ought to be known by his name. He gave me everything I had. The least I can do is let you remember him. Over the following weeks at that kitchen table, he taught me what he called simply the method. I've kept it my whole life since. It fit on the back of an envelope, and it went like this. Date and time on everything in the moment, not that evening from memory. In the moment when the furnace dies, when the water comes in, when he says the thing he says, the minute it happens, you write it down. Memory is a liar and a coward. The date is neither. Photograph everything, with the timestamp on. A wide shot so no one can say you staged it, and a close shot so no one can say it wasn't real. The bulge in the ceiling and the room it lives in. The mold and the wall it grows on. Put everything to him in writing. Never a phone call you can't prove happened. A text, an email, a note slipped under a door with a copy kept for yourself, polite, factual, dull. On the 14th at 6:40 in the evening, the heat stopped. It is now the 16th and the unit remains cold. Please advise. Nothing you'd be ashamed to have read aloud in a courtroom. Nothing angry, nothing you'd want back. And then the rule that turned out to be the whole game. Never, ever, let him know you're documenting. The moment he knows, he adapts, Pharaoh said, and his voice went very quiet and very serious. A frightened landlord who thinks no one is watching keeps making the same mistake forever. A careful landlord who knows he's being recorded gets clever. A confident man is easy to catch. A careful man is very hard, so you let him stay confident. You be frightened on the outside, flinch, apologize, look away, let him think he's won every time. And inside, you be a clerk, you write down the date. Write what a camera would see, he told me. Never what you felt. The judge will supply the feelings. Your job is only the facts. Keep it boring. Boring is bulletproof. I went home that night and started a file. A battered accordion folder the old man gave me, soft at the corners from decades of his own cases. I still have it. Everything went into it. And I want to be clear about something because it's the hinge of this whole story. At that point, I had no plan. I wasn't building a case. I didn't even know yet that there was a case to build. I was just a frightened woman with a cold apartment, doing the one thing a calm old man had told me to do, which was refuse to let the truth evaporate. There was a young father on the second floor, in the unit they called 2B. His name was Dominic, and he was the reason all of this stopped being about ceilings and started being about something I couldn't put down. Dominic worked 2 jobs, days at a warehouse, nights cleaning offices downtown, and I almost never saw him because he was almost never home, which was the point. He was trying to save enough to get his boy somewhere better. His son was 6, and his name was Marcus. A bright, watchful kid with a cough that never fully went away. I'd see Marcus in the hall sometimes, sitting on the stairs with a little machine and a mask over his face, breathing the mist in with the bored patience of a child who has done this 1,000 times. A nebulizer. His father kept a log of every treatment, taped inside a kitchen cabinet, dates and times in a careful hand, because when your child can't breathe, the date and time it happens is the most important thing in the world. I didn't understand yet why the cough was getting worse. I thought, an old building, damp, these things happen, poor kid, bad luck. It was Dominic, exhausted, standing in his doorway one night, who said the thing that changed the temperature of everything. It's the wall, he said. In his room, there's black on it. I clean it and it comes back, and the paint by the window, it's old, it flakes, and he's a kid, he touches everything. He rubbed his face. The doctor asked me about lead. They tested his blood. He stopped. He couldn't finish it. I want to say a hard thing plainly here because the old man taught me to. An old building is bad luck. Bad luck is nobody's fault. But a man collecting government money every month specifically to keep that building safe, who chooses instead to let a 6-year-old breathe mold and touch lead so he can keep the difference, that is not bad luck. That is a decision. DeVerl could have fixed it. He had the money to fix it in his pocket, sent by the government for exactly that purpose. He just decided Marcus wasn't worth it. That is not misfortune. That is injustice, and the two are not the same, and I will not let them be blurred. I need to explain the thing I didn't know yet, the thing that turned a sad building into a crime, because when Pharaoh finally explained it to me at his kitchen table, I felt the floor tilt. Most of the tenants in the Bellamy were on a housing subsidy. The government paid a large part of their rent directly to the landlord every month, on the strict condition that the units met a basic standard of safety, heat, no mold, No peeling lead paint, working plumbing. To keep that money flowing, the landlord had to certify once a year that each unit had passed inspection. He signed a form. He swore in writing that the conditions were met. And on the strength of that signature, the checks kept coming. You understand what that means. Every year, he sat down and signed his name to a document swearing that the widow's ceiling was sound, that the boys' walls were clean, that the heat worked. And every year it was a lie, and every year he collected the money anyway. Here is the thing your landlord does not understand, Pharaoh said, and he said it slowly so I'd remember it, and I've remembered it every day since. A landlord can neglect his tenants for years, and the worst that happens is a housing court order, a fine, a slap. The system is slow and it forgives, but defrauding the government is a different order of trouble entirely. When he lies to us, that's a dispute. When he lies to the housing authority to collect money he isn't owed, that's fraud. And fraud brings people who do not forgive and do not go slow. The housing authority. And behind them, if the money is federal, investigators of a kind your landlord has never once imagined coming for him. He leaned back. And here's the beauty of it, the thing he'll never see. Every one of those certificates is dated. Everyone is signed in his own hand. Every single lie he told to keep the money is a separate, provable, dated count against him. He thinks each signature is a key that unlocks a check. He doesn't know that each one is a confession he signed himself. He is building the case against himself, 1 year at a time, and mailing it to the government. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the cold and I thought about the file in the accordion folder, and for the first time I understood that it wasn't a diary of complaints. It was the other half of his confession. He was writing that it all worked. I was writing that none of it did. And someday, someone was going to lay those 2 stacks of paper side by side. The next morning, I bought a stack of cheap notebooks. The dollar kind, the kind a kid takes to school. I started with Odessa. I climbed to the 3rd floor and I sat at her kitchen table under the weeping ceiling and I gave her a notebook and I taught her the method in the plainest words I had. Write the date. Write the time. Write only what a camera would see. And then I told her the thing that I think, in the end, mattered more than any date in any file. You're not the only one, I said. He tells each of us we're alone. He tells you it's your humidifier, and he tells the man downstairs it's his cooking, and he tells the family on 4 they wouldn't understand the rules. That isolation, that's the product he's really selling. It's how he keeps us quiet. But you're not alone. There's a whole building of us, and every one of us has a leak. She cried a little, not from sadness. I recognized it, because I'd felt it at the old man's table. It's the specific relief of being told that the shame you've been carrying alone was never yours to carry. Then I went to Dominic and gave him a notebook, though he already kept the best records in the building without knowing it. That taped-up nebulizer log was a masterpiece of exactly the kind of plain dated fact that wins. I told him to keep it. I told him to photograph the wall, wide and close, with the date on. I told him to keep every message from the doctor about the lead. Then the immigrant family on 4, who were the most frightened of all, who believed, because he had carefully taught them to believe, that complaining could cost them their home, their standing, everything. That took longer. That took tea and patience, and the widow coming with me to say it in a way a neighbor says it. But eventually there was a notebook in that apartment, too. I never told any of them we were building a case. I don't think I fully believed we were. I just went door to door being boring, handing out notebooks and saying 2 things. Write the date, and you're not alone. I was the quiet thread running between the rooms, and he never saw the thread, because a thread is a very hard thing to see when you're only ever looking at one room at a time. The heat failed in January, and it failed for everyone at once, and that was his mistake, though it took me a while to understand it as a gift. For 3 days in the coldest week of the year, the furnace was dead. Pharaoh's radiator, and mine, and Odessa's, and Marcus's. I want you to picture that boy with the cough that week, sleeping in a coat in a room with black on the wall, and his father heating water on the stove so there'd be some warmth, and the little machine humming its mist into the cold. I photographed the thermometer in my kitchen, 49 degrees, and the date, and the time. I photographed it every few hours for 3 days. So did Odessa. So did Dominic. 4 apartments, 4 cold thermometers, all documented, all dated, none of us telling him. To him, I sent the boring message. The heat stopped on the 4th at approximately 9 p.m. It is now the 7th. The unit is at 49 degrees. There is a child in the building. Please advise. Polite, factual, nothing you'd be ashamed to read in court. And Deverell wrote back. He wrote back in his own hand on his own phone a message I have kept and copied and can still recite. He said the cold was good for the pipes, that we were coddled, that his own grandmother raised 6 kids in a house colder than this, and that if we didn't like it, we were free to find somewhere warmer. He told us to stop bothering him. He put it in writing. A landlord collecting subsidy money to provide heat, telling a building full of paying tenants, one with a sick child, that the lack of heat was our own softness, in writing, with a date on it. I read it twice, and I did the thing Pharaoh taught me, which was the hardest thing of all. I felt nothing on the outside. I sent back a meek little understood, thank you. Let him think he'd won. Let him stay confident. And then I put his message in the accordion file in its place, dated, beside the 4 cold thermometers, and I closed the folder, and I understood that he had just handed me something he could never take back. The file was growing too big for the accordion folder, so it graduated to a shoebox, and then to a second one. I want to describe what was in those boxes, because they became the whole spine of what happened, and because I think there's something almost holy about how ordinary they were. Photographs, hundreds of them, each with a date. Odessa's ceiling across 2 winters, the bulge growing, the stains spreading, the mold advancing like a slow, dark tide. The boys' wall, the black returning each time it was cleaned. Thermometers, the peeling paint by the window, close enough to see the alligator texture that anyone who knows old paint knows means lead. Copies of every message I ever sent him, and the gold, the real gold, every reply he ever sent me, in his own careless, confident hand. And the nebulizer log. Dominic let me photograph it, page by page, the whole 2 years of it, every treatment dated in his careful hand. Because here is a thing I understood by then that he never would. A child's breathing, logged by date, laid beside a wall of mold, logged by date, laid beside a signed certificate swearing that wall was clean, logged by date. That is not 3 sad stories. That is a single sentence with a beginning, a middle, and a signature at the end. That is cause and effect, written down in order, by the very people it happened to. Pharaoh came up once and looked at the boxes on my table, and he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I've never forgotten. You know what this is? He put one finger on the lid. This is rope. Long, strong, patient rope. And the beautiful thing, the thing that lets an old man like me sleep at night, you didn't spin a single inch of it. He did. Every day. He just doesn't know yet that it's already tied. In the spring, I saw the thing I had been documenting toward without knowing I was aiming at it. The annual inspection was coming. The housing authority sent an inspector once a year, and Deverell, I learned this from the family on 4 who overheard him in the hall, had a system for it. He knew which units the inspector would check. He'd do a frantic, cheap patch job the week before, a coat of paint over the mold so it looked clean for a day, a space heater borrowed into a cold unit, a bucket emptied, a towel hidden. And then, when the inspector had come and gone, he'd sign the certificate swearing everything had passed, and collect his money for another year, and let the paint-over mold bloom right back through. That spring, I did 2 things. First, I photographed the mold before he painted over it, and I photographed the fresh paint the week of the inspection, and I photographed the mold coming back through the paint 2 weeks later. The same wall, 3 dates, the whole lie in sequence. A camera cannot be argued with. Second, and this was Pharaoh's idea, and it was quietly brilliant, I made sure the housing authority had on file a dated complaint from a tenant, sent by mail, describing the exact conditions before the inspection. Not so they'd act. They were slow. We didn't expect them to act. But so that later, when someone finally looked, there would be a government record proving that on a specific date, the housing authority had been told the truth, and that on a date a few days later, the landlord had signed a certificate swearing the opposite. That is the whole trap, and it is so simple it's almost funny. He signed that everything passed. We had sitting in a government file dated proof it hadn't, sent before he signed. He didn't know we'd sent it. He signed anyway. He signed his own name to a lie he'd already been caught telling, and he did it because he was certain, completely, comfortably certain, that no one was keeping the other half of the record. He was wrong. We were all keeping it. 4 apartments, 4 notebooks, 2 shoeboxes, and a government envelope with a postmark on it. And still he had no idea, because I had never once let him see me be anything but a frightened, apologetic, defeated woman in a cold apartment. Be frightened on the outside. Be a clerk on the inside. I had gotten very, very good at it. I want to tell you about the family on the 4th floor, because they taught me the thing about isolation that I don't think I'd have understood otherwise, and because they were the bravest people in that building, and almost nobody ever knew it. There were 5 of them in a 2-bedroom, a mother, a father, a grandmother, and 2 small girls, and they had come from somewhere far away and hard, and they had built a life in that cramped apartment with a care that made your chest ache to see it. There were plants on every windowsill. There was a cloth on the table. There were the girls' drawings taped to the walls in the exact places where, behind the drawings, the plaster was going soft and gray with damp. They had hidden the rot behind their daughter's pictures. I have never seen anything sadder or more dignified. They did not complain, and it took me a long time to understand it wasn't because nothing was wrong. It was because the landlord had found their particular fear and pressed on it, gently, over and over, the way he found everyone's. He had let them understand, never in so many words, never anything you could write down, that people like them didn't have the standing to make demands, that a complaint could bring the kind of attention that ended with a family on the street, that the safest thing was to be grateful and quiet and invisible. He had turned their caution into a leash, and they held it themselves because he'd taught them to. Mother was the first of them to trust me, and she did it because of Odessa. It matters that it was a neighbor and not a stranger. An official could have knocked on that door for a year and got nothing. But she climbed those stairs with me and sat at that cloth-covered table and told the mother her own story, one tenant to another, in the plain language of 2 women who'd both been made to feel ashamed of a leak. And something in the mother eased. That is the whole mechanism of the thing he'd built, and the whole mechanism of taking it apart. He isolated us 1 door at a time. We unisolated ourselves the same way, 1 door, 1 neighbor, 1 kitchen table at a time. I don't want to give you the idea that this went quickly, because the truth of it, and I promised you the truth, is that most of it was waiting. There were long months where nothing happened. The heat would come back and the fear would recede, and people would start to wonder, quietly, whether the file in my closet was just a strange hobby of a strange woman, whether any of it would ever matter, whether the smart thing wasn't just to keep our heads down and get through. I wondered it too. There is a specific loneliness in keeping a careful record of a wrong that the world seems in no hurry to notice. You begin to feel like the only person who remembers a thing everyone else has agreed to forget. I went down to the ground floor in one of those low months and said as much to Pharaoh. I told him I wasn't sure it was worth it, that maybe he was moving too slowly to ever be caught, that maybe the system truly didn't care, that maybe I was just making myself miserable cataloging a misery I couldn't fix. He listened the way he always did, without hurry, and then he said the thing I've held onto longest of everything he gave me. You're confusing 2 jobs, he said. There's the job of making the reckoning come. That one isn't yours. You don't control the housing authority or the investigators or the day the right person finally reads the right page. If you tie your piece to that, you'll go mad, because you can't make it happen and you can't make it happen faster. He refilled my tea. Your job is the other one. Your job is to make sure that when the day comes, and it comes for men like him more often than you'd think because they never stop, the truth is sitting there, dated and undeniable, waiting. You keep the file so it's ready. Whether and when it's needed, that's gravity's business, not yours. Yours is only to keep the record honest and let it wait. He smiled. The truth doesn't get tired. It can outweight him. Can you outweight your own doubt? I could. I went back upstairs and I kept the file. And the day did come, the way he said it would, because the old man was right about the one thing that mattered most. Men like that never stop. They can't. The confidence that makes them dangerous is the same confidence that makes them careless, and a careless man signs 1 certificate too many, sooner or later, in his own hand. It began to come apart not because we attacked, but because, eventually, the truth we'd been quietly filing reached the right desk. Marcus had another blood test, and the number had climbed, and this time the doctor was obligated to report it, and a lead complaint about a subsidized building involving a child is the one kind of thing that even a slow system cannot ignore. an investigator was assigned. And when that investigator came around asking questions, the kind of quiet, patient, date-oriented questions the old man had spent his life asking, she found a building full of tenants who, to her open astonishment, each produced a dated notebook, and Odessa with 2 years of ceiling photographs, and Dominic with a 2-year nebulizer log, and me with 2 shoeboxes and an accordion folder soft at the corners, organized by date, cross-referenced, boring as a phone book, and twice as damning. Deverell, when he was finally called to explain himself, did the thing that men like him always do. He talked. There was a hearing, a deposition, technically under oath, and I was there, sitting quietly against the wall because I was a witness who might be called. "Your MS, Boudreaux, Yvette." The investigator had asked me that morning, checking her list, and I'd nodded and gone back to being invisible, which was the only thing I knew how to be in a room like that. And he was so sure of himself, so used to being the most confident man in every room, that he could not stop talking. When they asked him for his inspection records, he waved a hand. When they asked him to produce documentation of the repairs he'd certified, Deverell actually smiled. "I don't keep all that paper," he said, on the record under oath. "I've run buildings for 20 years. I know what I did. My word is good enough. It always has been." I watched the investigator write that down. My word is good enough. I don't keep records. I thought about the shoeboxes in my closet and the accordion folder and the government envelope with the postmark, and I understood that he had just, under oath, thrown away the only defense a man in his position ever has, which is a paper trail of his own. He had none. He had only his word. And we had a decade of dated proof that his word was a lie. He had signed his own certificates swearing the units passed. Now, under oath, he'd sworn he kept no records to back them up. He had confessed with a bow on it. He had sealed himself in his own coffin and complimented himself on the carpentry. I did not smile. The old man had taught me that too. I looked frightened and small, the way I always had, and I wrote down the date. It moved quickly after that, the way a thing moves quickly only after moving slowly for years. The housing authority pulled his certifications and set them beside our dated complaints and photographs, and the pattern was not subtle. Year after year, a signature swearing a unit had passed, sitting next to dated proof that on that very date the unit had black mold, no heat, or peeling lead paint. Each certificate a separate count. Each one dated, each one signed, each one worth a specific sum of money he had collected on a specific lie. The subsidy payments he'd received for uninhabitable units were subject to clawback. And falsely certifying to collect them carried penalties that stacked, certificate by certificate, year by year, until the number in the local paper read just over $231,000. The full weight of what Deverell had signed for, a figure I'd already half known, because I'd been quietly adding it up in the shoeboxes for 2 years. I remember telling Pharaoh that it felt strange, that I'd expected to feel triumphant, and instead I felt something closer to still. Like watching a bridge that had been improperly built simply come down under its own weight in the rain. Nobody pushed it. It was always going to fall. It had been falling for years. He nodded like I'd finally understood the lesson he'd been teaching all along. "That's because this isn't revenge," he said. "Revenge is a thing you do to someone. This, what you did, you never did anything to him. You never lied about him. You never touched his car or his name. You wrote down what was true and you refused to look away and you refused to be frightened into silence. That's all. Everything that's happening to him now, he did to himself years ago in his own hand." He smiled, tired and kind. "That's not revenge, child. That's gravity. You can't take revenge on a man by letting him fall off a cliff he built himself. You can only decline to catch him." The building was placed under a court-appointed receiver, and then, and this is the part that still undoes me a little, it was bought by a tenant nonprofit, an organization that exists to take failing buildings away from men like him and put them in the hands of the people who live in them. They gutted the mold. They stripped the lead paint down to clean substrate and sealed it. They replaced the furnace, the whole thing, so that the winter after, Marcus slept warm. Odessa's ceiling was opened, dried, treated, and closed clean, and she took the towel off the pot and the pot off the table and put a bowl of fruit there instead. And there was a day, near the end in a courtroom, where Deverell had to acknowledge out loud what he had done. A consent decree and allocution, the legal machinery has names for it, and they don't matter. What matters is that Deverell stood up, and he read from a page in a voice that had lost all its lobby-light warmth, an admission that he had falsely certified those units, that he had collected money he was not owed, that he had known the conditions, and signed that they were fine. I was there. I sat a few feet away, close enough to see the page shake in his hands. And I want you to know exactly what I did, because it is the thing I'm proudest of in my whole life. I did nothing. I said not one single word. I didn't need to. Every word that mattered was already being read aloud, and he was the one reading it from a page, in his own admission, the way he'd once signed his own certificates and written his own careless messages about pipes and coddled tenants and grandmothers in cold houses. I had spent years being the boring, frightened, apologetic clerk he never once suspected. There was nothing left for me to add. I let the record do the only talking that had ever mattered. I looked at him the way he had once looked at the water in the lobby, unbothered, and then I looked away because there was somewhere I'd rather be, which was upstairs, where the heat worked now and a boy could breathe. I've thought a great deal in the years since about why it worked, and I've decided it wasn't the shoeboxes, not really. It wasn't even the dates, though the dates were everything. It was that Deverell's entire power ran on a single belief, and the belief was false. He believed no one was writing it down. Every cruelty he committed, every lie he signed, every message he sent about coddled tenants and good for the pipes cold, all of it rested on the certainty that the moment would evaporate, that it was his word against a frightened tenant's memory, and memory fades and tenants move and shame keeps people quiet. That was his real product, the thing he sold to each of us one door at a time, the feeling that we were alone and that nothing we suffered would ever be recorded. The method destroyed that, and it destroyed it for free, with dollar store notebooks and a phone camera and an old man's patience. It didn't require money or a lawyer or courage of the loud kind. It required only that we refuse the isolation, refuse the shame, and refuse to let the truth die on the day it happened. Write the date. And quietly to the next frightened person in the next cold room, you are not the only one. The old man told me once that the truth doesn't get tired, that it will sit in a shoebox for years, patient as stone, and it will be exactly as true on the day someone finally opens the box as it was on the day it happened. He was right. That's the whole secret. Liars have to keep working. They have to remember every story, prop up every claim, adapt to every new person watching. But the person who simply writes down what happened has to do nothing at all but wait. Time is on the side of the one who kept the receipt. Pharaoh passed 2 winters after the building changed hands, peacefully, in the warm. Near the end, he gave me the accordion folder, his own, the soft-cornered one he'd handed me that first cold night, the one that had held decades of his cases before it ever held mine. He told me to give it to someone who'd need it. I understood him to mean the folder, and I understood him to mean the method, and I understood him to mean the whole quiet inheritance of it. That you fight the people who count on your silence not with noise but with dates. That you meet manufactured isolation with a hand on the next door, and the words you're not alone. That you keep the file and let it grow patient and true in the dark until the day it's ready. I've given the folder away since. I won't say to whom, except that it was someone in a cold room being told it was her own fault, someone who'd started to believe she was the only one. I taught her the method at a kitchen table, the way it was taught to me. Write the date. Photograph it wide and close. Put it in writing, polite and boring. Never let him know. Be frightened on the outside and a clerk on the inside. And you're not alone, you were never alone. That was only ever the thing he needed you to believe. Dominic got his son out eventually. Not out of the building, as it turned out, because the building got well before they had to leave it. The new furnace held. The clean walls stayed clean. Marcus's blood numbers came down, slowly and then steadily, until a doctor finally said the word normal, and the little machine with the mask went into a closet and stayed there. I saw Marcus not long ago, except he isn't a boy anymore. Tall now, easy in his shoulders, breathing without thinking about it the way the lucky do, the way everyone should get to. He didn't recognize me, and there was no reason he should, and I didn't say anything, because saying nothing at the right moment had by then become the truest thing I knew how to do. I just watched him cross the lobby of a building that had almost cost him his lungs, under a light that a bad man once installed to make himself look kind, and walk out into the afternoon whole. That's the ending I'd choose if I got to choose one. Not the number in the paper, though I won't pretend the number wasn't sweet. Not the shaking page in a courtroom. Just a kid in a doorway full of light, breathing, who will never know how close it came, because a building full of frightened people decided to stop being frightened and to write down the date. The rope is coiled now, soft at the corners, in the hands of someone new. And somewhere a careful, confident man is learning, one day at a time, what it costs to be certain that no one is ever watching. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. It means more than I can easily say that you sat with this quiet, slow kind of story right through to the light at the end of it. If any of it stayed with you, you're welcome to subscribe to Revenge Lab and hear the next one. No pressure, ever, only if it's worth your time, and only for as long as it is. If you've got a moment, tell me in the comments where in the world you listened from and how your day has really been. I read them, and I think about you out there in the quiet more than you'd guess. However today has treated you, I hope tonight is gentle, and that the truth, when you need it, is patient enough to wait for you. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next